Welcome to Working for Women, the Independent Women's Forum podcast, where we are changing the conversation about women and public policy for the better.
Hey everyone, I'm Julie Gumlock with the Independent Women's Forum and your host for today's Working for Women podcast. Today I'm here with Carrie Lucas, IWF's Executive Director, to talk about the President's tax plan, and specifically his plan to extend the child tax credit. This is a very popular deduction, at least with parents, that was created in 1997 under President Clinton, and it was expanded in 2001 under President George W. Bush, and it's slated to be expanded again. So thanks, Carrie, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Julie.
So first, Carrie, I gave a little bit of information about the tax credit. Can you give us a little bit more information? What specifically is it? How does it work? And how much is the deduction currently that parents enjoy?
Yeah, it's interesting, Julie. So this is a really, as you said, it's a very popular tax credit. It is something that if a parent with a child under age 18 can take. It's currently $1,000. And we're not sure exactly how much it's going to be expanded. There's some proposals to double the child tax credit, but we'll have to see. This is something that's being debated right now, but that's why I think it's important to have conversations about this, because obviously there's trade-offs when it comes to how you structure tax reform packages, which deductions and credits you're going to keep, versus which what means it affects the other things you can do. But I think this is a big winner for parents, and it's one that I actually think should be prioritized, because I do think that this is it's important for parents to have tax relief. This is a way that you can get more tax relief to people with lower income, and so I think it's something that it's worth prioritizing as we consider the new tax reform package.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think most people would, they sort of agree, yes, this will help. It's great that people can have more money that they take home. Less goes to the government. They take home more. What are can you give me some tangible examples of how parents will benefit from getting this tax break?
Yeah, I think that this is really the type of thing that I hope as a conservative, you'll hear it's interesting because obviously there's a lot of people, a lot of different sides on tax issues, and it's not just the left wanting higher taxes and the right wanting lower taxes. Within what you would largely consider the right, there's a big question between how much you want to focus on providing marginal tax breaks. So that's the marginal, changing the marginal tax rates that somebody pays. And a lot of people, for very good reason, want all the emphasis to be on that, because they say, you want to make work pay. So you want people to think that the next dollar that they earn, that they aren't going to lose half of it to the government. They're only going to have to pay 20% to the government. And deductions or tax credits, which is what the child tax credit, that doesn't change that. This is something where the way the child tax credit works is at the end of you take all a family's earnings, and then you say you start taking the deductions and the tax credits they can. So it chops away at what you would owe, but it doesn't affect how much you pay on that last dollar. Or it does affects it a lot. It affects it a lot less. So so that's why a lot of people would say, hey, this isn't a good way to structure it, because it's not encouraging people to work more. And while I very much sympathize with that, and I think that we absolutely need to include tax rate cuts so that people do have an incentive to work more. I think that it's still worth having this. Children are really expensive, and the way I think about it as a conservative is I would much rather put more money in people's pockets, because this isn't complicated. The child tax credit goes up. If you're somebody with kids, you're going to have more money in your pocket at the end of the year because your tax bill is going to go down. And I would hope that as a lawmaker, as the policymakers think about it, they should be thinking, okay, let's put more money in parents' pockets so they can spend it as they see fit, instead of creating all sorts of programs that are subsidizing this or encouraging that or creating a small tax break on that. I even think, as we consider the tax deduction and kind of the overall tax regime, I would be looking at other places. Right now you can deduct some of your child care expenses, and that's nice. And I understand it's to help people who are paying out of pocket for child care so that they can work, they work outside of the home and earn income. That's important. But I'd rather us, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to provide a deduction for people who are paying for child care, I would rather say, let's increase the child tax credit so that everybody with kids, regardless of how you structure your find care, I think that's much better to move in that. So those are the trade-offs I hope people are thinking about when they think about if we should increase this tax credit.
Now, I'm not the tax expert on staff, but I do write about parenting, and obviously I'm the mother of 3 kids, so this really affects me as well. But I'm wondering if you can give sort of our listeners a little bit more. These are questions that I would have. Like this tax credit, Trump, it's per kid, so it's up to. I mean, it's currently $1,000. It can be up to $1,000 per kid. Is that correct?
Yes. It depends on also your overall income. It gets phased. I believe it gets phased out at some point. I'm not sorry that I don't remember the threshold. And I think I think that makes there's a reason for that, because we all understand that as with a lot of government programs, everybody has needs. Everybody has. It's hard for just about everybody to make to raise kids today. But we know it's particularly hard for people who are at the bottom. So that's one reason why I think that it makes sense to phase it out, so we can focus more resources at those who need it most.
Well, you had mentioned that it's not about a marginal tax cut versus these sort of tax deductions, and there's an argument there, and I think that probably is why we do see people sort of pushing back on child tax rate as punishing those without children, and so I can see that argument as well, because if you don't have children, you still deserve a tax break. You have expenses that are different. But I will say, as the mother of 3 children, and I have relatives and friends who do not have children, it's a joy to be a parent, but it is unbelievably expensive. It is, between all the sports that my children do, and their clothing needs, and housing needs, and school requirements, it's just it's pretty hard. And I imagine if you lived at or under near, if you didn't make as much money as some people do, it's really difficult. So these kinds of things, even a little bit, being able to keep a little bit of the money that you're normally paying to the government is an enormous help.
Exactly, and I do think that's why I think we should consider it as I think we've essentially decided as a society that we want to take care of kids. We've decided that you're not just going to have that this is a societal responsibility, and we're going to make sure that we want to make sure as a country that kids have education, healthcare needs, so that even if they are living in poverty, that they're going to or have lower families with a lower household income, that these basic necessities are taken care of. The question really is how we're going to do that. And so we're instead of, I would hope that we would be focused on trying to give parents more resources, making it easy for parents to take care of their own kids and make the choices that make sense for themselves and their families based on what they already have and what they need, rather than providing kind of this drip of government programs and support that often end up being inferior. Things like government health care, or these, as you've written so much, Julie, about the feeding programs. It would be much better if you had fewer kids depending on schools for lunch, and more parents who had more money in their budget so they could do it themselves or keep a parent home a little more, didn't have to work quite as hard. There's these are the trade-offs that I think we should be thinking of when we think about the tax credit.
Carrie, just a few more questions. You said that I'm interested in, one criticism I've heard of these things is that how this could reduce tax revenues. Do you think this is a legitimate concern? What about that? I mean, if we allow people to save more, keep more money, their own money, we are going to see a reduction in revenues, correct?
Absolutely, and that is something that is a legitimate question that we have to grapple with. There's a lot of things where the current way that we score the score tax packages can be very very misleading. It's often looking at the CBO scores often are worse than no information, because they often tell us, point us in the wrong direction. But that said, you're absolutely right. This is not one there. When you cut tax rates, there is often increased economic output, which increases tax revenues, which would which make it so it's not a direct loss. But on this one, it's absolutely going to cost a lot of money. It's when parents are a huge group, and increasing the child tax credit will be expensive in terms of lost tax revenue, which is why we have to be careful about exactly how high it can go. But I also think that's why I think that we really should be thinking about is the other side of the ledger. If we can I would much rather us reduce our tax income and then reduce how much government spends. So we should take a look at there's a ton of government spending that is focused on children and is focused on but the thing is that as you know, Julie, when it comes to all the programs that are meant to help children, for every dime that gets to a kid, you have $1 that's being cycled through a huge bureaucracy and paying a bunch of people to push papers around. So very little ends up getting to the actual kid you're trying to service or trying to help.
And not to mention the overlap and duplication in these programs. It's insane when you think that there are a dozen nutrition programs. There are
exactly.
You're right that there's a lot of sort of good governance issues that come at play here. But the last question I have is I want to talk a little bit about how the media has been reporting this, and actually just I have a good example here of this sort of snide comment. A reporter, she got blasted on Twitter for saying this, but after Trump came out with this plan and also Ivanka has talked a lot about the child tax credit. This reporter went on Twitter and said, because there was talk that it would increase it from $500 to $1,000 per family, depending on what the their tax rate was. But this reporter said, "Gosh, that's nothing. Why is this even a thing? $500,000 is nothing." And that is so insulting. It's typical of the elitist press to be so completely out to lunch that they don't understand just how much that is. I'm the mother of 3 boys. I go through a loaf of bread after 2 days. I'm done. It lasts me. I go through a gallon of milk, several times a week. And so I think about $1,000 to my family, like all those loaves of bread, all this. There are things that can be purchased that are necessary for a family, and you get to choose what you. It might not be loaves of bread, it might not be gallons of milk, but you get to choose what you spend that money on. And so I do think it's interesting how people don't understand what it's like for the vast majority of people, working class and middle class people, what it's like to live.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of elitism, and I think that a lot of the people covering the tax debate are don't realize how lucky they are. They're not the top 1%, but they're certainly usually in the top 25%. There's a lot of people who don't recognize just how paycheck to paycheck, so many Americans are living, and especially families trying to raise young kids. $1,000 or $500. If you can put that, just think about putting that in an education savings fund. That means a lot over the course of the next decade. That can be significant. Or it's the difference between signing up for a sports for sports teams, signing up to get tutoring, taking a family vacation, and that there's value in that. So there's absolutely this is real money, and it matters to a lot of American families that they can keep a little bit more of what they're earning. And I think a lot of people would be much more happy with that, and to see some of what government it says it's doing for us. Again, with all the nutrition programs, all of the bureaucracy, everything that's going on the Department of Education, where I look at a lot of times, I'm thinking, man, this is a waste of time. You think about the Department of Education seems to mostly be in the business of generating paperwork for our schools. Let's cut their budget a little bit and roll back some of these programs that are just hampering our local schools and aren't providing them support, and let parents keep some of that money. We can find the money. It is an expensive tax credit, but there's a whole lot of fat that can be cut off of the budget and returned to parents that will be much better spent.
Well, Carrie, thanks so much for joining us today. This is a really complicated issue, and I think you really explained it in very clear terms. So appreciate you coming on today. This has been another edition of IWF Working for Women podcast. Visit us at IWF.org for more information. That is where all issues are women's issues.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, or stop by IWF.org for similar content.